Cipher, in terms of Honkai Star Rail, is the peak definition of damage per screenshot. With that being said though, I think this playstyle works out fantastically well for my personal favorite thief in the game, Cipher. Now that I've had some time to have hands-on experience with this character, I'm gonna go over some pros and cons as my first impressions with this character. Afterward, I will also supplement video evidence of my own recordings to help better illustrate some of my talking points. So in terms of pros, Cipher is a character who can very easily hit 160 plus speed. This makes her really great for SP generation, especially for teams that tend to be very SP hungry. The signature light cone is extremely flexible, being able to be used on a wide variety of characters. You might be able to use this on Black Swan, Silver Wolf, Pela, maybe a full-blown support Kafka, just to name a few examples. She is the first normal energy based character that's not going to be negatively impacted by energy draining attacks. So for example, like the banana TV boss, for example, has one of the TVs that has an AoE hit that will drain energy from almost all characters in the game, with the exception of Castorus, Fei Xiao, and Acheron. So even though Cipher in the scenario would get her energy drained, this doesn't have any negative impact on her because all the enemies are doing is delaying the inevitable. What I love about the ultimate is that it appears to have some growing room for future content as we get enemies with more HP, and it is pretty flexible in terms of whether or not you want to hold on to it or if you want to just pop it as soon as you get access to it. Video examples will be provided later on in the video. Now, this is something that is pretty cool that I found out from other people online. With Cipher being paired with Mighty, her Patreon debuff actually gives Mighty a tier 2 enemy priority outside of his own ultimate taunt. So for those of you who aren't a fan of his uncontrollable autoplay gameplay and you want more control over it, Cipher could be a big solution for that. As a personal pro, I think Shia Faraday, the English VA for Cipher, did a wonderful job. I loved her portrayal of Cipher and she killed it basically. So Cipher does have a couple of cons that I'm going to go ahead and list out very quickly. Without the signature light cone, Cipher's damage outside of her ultimate is going to be non-existent. Right now this might not be an issue, but later on this could be, as this may result in your AV and Apocalyptic Shadow being significantly lower, for example, or you may find yourself taking up additional cycles in Memory of Chaos as example. Sometimes every little bit of damage helps. Even if Cipher were to have her signature light cone, Cipher is one of the most paper 5-star characters released to date. If you have a strong sustain, you can mitigate this issue mainly, but not all players are going to have a strong sustain pair with Cipher. Cipher builds that barely reach 170 speed may suffer greatly from any type of speed debuffs because she needs to have exactly 170 speed or higher in order to maintain her full stats. You get hit with a debuff, for example, that may drop you into the 160s or the 150s, her stats are going to be very negatively impacted. Alright, so for Fei Xiao testing in regards to Apocalyptic Shadow, I started off with March and Tribby. Scored around 1334 points. I think it's a passable score, so I'll take it. I then went ahead and swapped out Tribby for Cipher and I scored 1289. So at least for my account in particular, it appears that Tribby is going to be a bigger improvement over Cipher if I'm directly comparing the two. Finally, I did a run with Tribby and Cipher, and in this clip, you're going to see an example of Cipher being focus targeted on and dying very easily, which goes back to my paper comment that I made earlier in the video. With that being said, this team did score 1423 points, which is the strongest variation of a Fei Xiao team that I personally have access to. It does make sense given the fact that Cipher will just boost the team's damage just by existing, whereas March's Sifu just provides a crit damage buff to whoever she syncs up with. It makes sense to me personally. So for Acheron teams, I started off with Silver Wolf and Pela. They ended up scoring 1380. I think this is a pretty solid score considering that Pela is completely off element and she's mainly here for the defense reduction. I then tried Black Swan and Kafka. I scored 1231 here. I do want to mention that even though I used the Baron debuff, I do think Vantalia and Apoc Shadow is the best boss for a DOT oriented team. So I'm sure if I took the same setup to Vantalia, this team would have naturally performed better versus Colia. Finally, I used Silver Wolf and Cipher, and I guess I had some really good RNG or something along those lines. I ended up scoring a 1562. I will take it. I'm very happy about the score. I did not test out Pela with Cipher, mainly because Pela herself would not have been able to help out with the toughness reduction, which is going to be pretty important for the Cocolia fight. Finally, with Cipher in the same mode, I went ahead and decided to put her on a very hardcore defense build, completely neglected her crit damage and her crit rate altogether. And even though the ultimate damage was not very very negatively impacted. All of her damage outside of that basically ended up being literal pebbles. So that's why there was such a huge drop off in AV in comparison to the 1562 run. Now, in terms of pure fiction, when I noticed when I was holding on to the ultimate, waiting to do just one giant nook at the end, I found myself in a position where my score was hovering about 28 to 29k. However, when I started using Cipher's ultimate toward the end of each respective wave, my overall score ended up being about 1 to 2k points higher. So instead of hovering around 28 to 29k, I started being more in that 29 to 30.5k. So pure fiction, from what I've personally experienced so far, it is a good idea to go ahead and use her ultimate toward the end of each wave. That way your main DPS, like Acheron for example, can just go into the next wave, potentially have her ultimate ready to go, and can start off fresh off on that wave instead of overkilling the prior wave. That's really going to be all my thoughts for Cipher. I really enjoyed this character a whole lot. I'm going to show you how my pulls went, and I'll have a little bit of commentary in that regard.
The play session is over. Collide that everyone believes in becomes a reality! Gotcha!
Enemy data secure. Net markers activated. Time for good old counterattack.
Alright, so I'm going to very briefly summarize how my pulls went for Cipher. Unfortunately, I did not win the 50-50 for Cipher. So what this ends up meaning is that unfortunately, I probably will not be able to attempt Finon. I am a little bummed out about this. I will probably have to wait for a rerun. But on a positive note, I did pick up Fei Xiao here. I can use her in an Acheron team to help smooth out that crit rate, because I think my Acheron's kind of hovering around like 88.6% crit rate right now. The E1 factored in, Fei Xiao will pretty much put her in a position where she's almost going to be hitting 100% if she's not going to be hitting 100%. That's my thoughts on that. I did win the 75-25 on the light cone, however. So right now, I'm just going to be saving for Hyselin. She has been officially confirmed for 3.5, and I'm very interested in seeing how T.O.T is going to perform. I will speak more on Hyselin in a separate video, and that's really going to be everything for today. If you have taken out the time to watch this or listen to this, just want to say thank you so much for your time. You be safe out there. Deuces.